the Florida Writer Podcast, a discussion about writing and other things.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Florida Writer Podcast with your host, Alison Nissen. And today I'm lucky enough to be with Nylda Dieppa. Nylda, welcome to the Florida Writer Podcast.
Thank you. It's so exciting to be here.
Could you give us a 60-second elevator pitch about who you are and what you write?
Well, I am a Puerto Rican woman born in Indianapolis, and I've been living in the United States for the last 50-some years. And I've had a long, exciting, complicated, crazy life that has been the muse for my writings. I've used writing to kind of help me stay focused and process, my life experiences, and also to escape. I've used, I've started reading when I was 3 years old, and I started writing as soon as I could, and I haven't stopped since. So it's like part of who I am and part of the reason I can keep surviving.
Just out of curiosity, I have read a number of Puerto Rican poets, and they always have such beautiful way of putting words together. Do you think that your culture of being born there and being raised as a Puerto Rican woman has helped you shape your poetry?
I think there's a lot of poetry in even the atmosphere of where I was raised, and also the music that I grew up in was very poetic language, and I think that kind of built into my being, So it's been a big influence in my life. Yeah, it's like I couldn't live without thinking about the beach and the palm trees and the mountains and all those natural, the rainforest, all these things. And it all contributes, all that imagery contributes to my writing.
Do you try to add the imagery with the language, or do you focus more on language for poetry?
I think it's all one and the same. When I write, it's kind of what's flowing out of my heart. And so I'm not really thinking about the difference between imagery and language. It just comes out. And then when I look at it later, then I might tweak it a little bit, but a lot of it is just what's inside of me that is dying to come out.
And that's how poetry works, right? It's like all of a sudden it's like your hand automatically picks up a pen and you must put it on the paper.
Yep. I have a little poem about writing when you have to and writing when you must, and when you have to, it's a big chore, but when you must, it's like the biggest pleasure, Oh,
I love that. I absolutely love that. And I'll tell you why, because I've tried to write poetry. I've tried to take like the 30-day poetry challenge where you write a poem every day. And it is a chore. You are 100% correct. And then if I'm ever feeling, it's usually when I'm anxious or I have some sort of turmoil going on. It's like, I have to sit down and write poetry. Like that's the only way I can get it out. It doesn't come out in a story. It won't come out as a blog. It has to come out as poetry. And it's a catharsis for me.
Mm-hmm. I did the 1 month poetry challenge from the Reader's Digest the same November that I was doing what's the writing thing on November, the NaNoWriMo. So I was doing the two things at the same time. It's like I was doing the poetry to kind of take a break from the writing and vice versa. And whenever I got a prompt that felt like I have to, I would think of a situation that had some, connection to that prompt, but not really the first thing that I would think of, not a literal connection necessarily. And so it was always fun to try to figure out how to get that prompt that didn't appeal to me and find something that really touched my heart. So, it didn't always work, and a lot of the poems had to go to the garbage, but a lot of those poems went into my first book.
How do you develop your poems?
I don't have I haven't sat down and figured out how to write a poem. I just sit there and let things come out. I don't, I think I just go by my heart. And then of course later, then I have to edit it, and some, add, if I want to add some figures of speech, some alliteration, some, I might want to do some rhyming, but usually each poem has its own form that it wants to have. And I just kind of follow the directions of the poem itself instead of trying to impose my form on it.
All right. So you've sent me a list of questions and that I can ask you. And one of them, which is really intriguing, which is, how have you overcome the multitude of traumas you've experienced in your life? Can you talk to that at all?
Well, dealing with traumatic experiences is a very long process, and I think it's a lifelong process. Even when I think I've totally overcome a particular trauma, after 10 years, some triggering event will happen and it'll come back to me and I'll be all right. And it was like it's already happening at that moment. But I think the way I have coped has been to take a deep breath, try to listen to my heart, also try to put myself in other people's situation where I can see if somebody has hurt me, I can see where they're coming from. So even though the pain is still there, at least there's not the anger that usually comes when somebody hurts you and like, oh, I want to get back with that person. I want to make them hurt. I want them to feel what I'm feeling. But that just adds to my discomfort. So if I'm able to humanize the other person, it just helps me tone down my emotions, not negate them. The pain is there, and I do have a right to feel the way I do because this thing did happen. For example, when my brother was kidnapped and murdered, that did happen to me. That was something very violent, and I had a right to be angry and to just want some justice, but I started reading in the newspaper stories about the people that had kidnapped him, and I started to understand how they were also victims of their own time and place and their own history, and they did something horrible, but I could understand them as human beings just trying to cope with their own lives and trying to, and I think that helped me get rid of some of that anger and help me move on. The loss of my brother in my life is always going to be there. I'm choking up just thinking of him right now, but I'd rather remember how he made oatmeal for me when I visited him, and how he would welcome me and say, "Hermanita," and give me a big hug. That's a better use of my time and my spirit than dealing with all the other situations. And that's how I've tried to cope with things in my life.
And that's it's so true that when we can humanize other people's experiences and, moving outside of ourselves to look into ourselves really is what we're doing. And how that just creates growth and empathy within ourselves. And I think that that's one of the things that makes poetry so great.
Yeah. And, in my poetry, sometimes I write something where I'm very angry and frustrated about something that happened in my marriage. And then the next thing, I'm able to kind of put myself into a position in which I'm looking at myself from a distance and saying, well, this is how I failed. This is how I should have known better, but I didn't know better. So I did what I could with the way I was raised and the way, society has put pressures on me, and just cope with the way you can.
How do you decide how much of your private life you should share with your audience?
I've never been a secretive person. I've always been very open with my friends and acquaintances and everything. And I think when I'm writing something that's going to be out there in public, what I think of is, how is this going to affect the people that are listening, especially if I'm talking about a specific person? Is this something that's going to cause harm to this person? Not just that the person might be embarrassed or feel guilty or have all these emotions that are normal to have when you realize you've done something wrong. And I have no problem with somebody that has done something wrong feeling these emotions, but I don't want to insult somebody. I don't want to ruin their reputation. I don't want to cause them undue harm. They can live with the consequences of their actions, but I don't want to inflict actions on somebody else that I would have to live with the consequences of that. So that's how I measure what I'm going to say. If I want to talk about things that have to do with my children, I have to make sure that I do it in such a way that it does not affect their lives, that I don't reveal private things of their own life that are not for me to reveal, and that I allow space for people that are reading my work to realize that this story is not necessarily about a particular person, but it's about a human experience, and many of us have been victims of some kind of abuse. Many of us have lost loved people, and so my specific experience is meant to help you understand yours. It's not meant to promote a certain way of judging the world.
And what are you working on now? You have anything new coming up?
I am stretching my style of writing. I have been doing crazy little poems a couple of times in the last couple of months. I've woken up with a weird, strange phrase that I go, this is so crazy. I'm going to play with it and see what I can do with it. And the two phrases are now the titles of two new poems. One is called Those I can't even say it. There's so much alliteration in it. Those pie-faced fools, which is, what do you do with that phrase? Well, you'll see it when you read my poem. And then the other one was, She Woke Up Dead. What? She woke up dead? What does that mean? That is so crazy, so surreal. So I let it just rip out, and just played with it and had the most fun. And I think I'm allowing myself to think of language in a different way, in which it's more a fun way of putting words together, not just telling my story. But in that poem, Those pie-faced fools, I ended up playing with the P sound and the F sound. And I put some, played with the order of words and whatever. And then when I looked at it, I realized I ended up talking about people that think that are very pious, but they don't have any mercy for those that are also suffering, But I didn't start thinking that I wanted to write about that. I just wanted to play with that phrase and see what would come out. But eventually, the real me comes out, whether I plan to or not. But that's what I'm trying to do these days. When I was getting my second book, the second edition of my first book published, my publisher asked me to get her a handful of new poems. And I had been going through a period of health problems where I thought I wasn't writing. And I started thinking, where am I going to get those new poems? Okay, so I started digging around, and I found out that I had been writing all these years that I thought I wasn't writing, but I was misfiling my poems. So, but by looking at old files in my computer where I didn't think I would have a poem hidden, I discovered all these poems. So I ended up with like 45 poems that I hadn't used in that first book. And so now I have enough to look at a second type of a second book that at first I thought I would call Otra Alborada, a new way of looking at life through maturity, something like that, you know, how through the years, and I have evolved as a human being. But I don't know what's going to happen with those new poems. I think because I have those that were written several years ago, and the new ones that I'm writing that are kind of crazy compared to those, you know, something will gel, and maybe it's going to be two books, or maybe it's going to be one book with a different perspective. I don't know. We'll see.
Wow, that sounds so interesting. Well, Nylda Dieppa, how can people get in touch with you?
They can write to me at info@nyldaDieppa.com, or go to my website, NyldaDieppa.com, and go from there.
Well, Nylda, are you ready to switch to our rapid fire questions?
Okay.
Do you have any games that you like to play?
Oh, I like to play word games. I love Wordle, and I love the mini crossword puzzle in the Times, and solitaire in my phone. You know, I can be addicted to those. So, but I prefer reading to playing those games.
And what's on your vacation bucket list?
Oh, you know, I always wanted to go to France, and I managed to get there twice. One time I went for 3 days, and of course you don't get to see Paris in 3 days. Then the second time I was going with my daughter. I was going to be there for a week in Paris, and I got sick, and I ended up in the emergency room and spent the rest of the week in my hotel room recovering. So I feel like Paris still deserves a chance. So I might like to go to France sometime, and maybe add other cities to that.
Final question: lake, river, or ocean?
Ocean.
Ocean, of course.
Yes, of course. I mean, that's what surrounded me literally all my growing up life until I was 25. Yeah.
Well, Nylda Dieppa, thank you so much for stopping by.
Oh, you're welcome. This has been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
You have been listening to another edition of the Florida Writer Podcast with your host, Alison Nissen. Alison out. We're all done. Nylda Dieppa is a poet, writer, facilitator, mother of 5, and grandmother of 6. She started dreaming of changing the world when she discovered words. Learning to read at the age of 3, she's loved literature and art ever since. Dieppa is the author of Alborada, a poetic memoir across cultures, which won a Royal Palms Literary Award from the Florida Writers Association in 2015 and a 2016 International Latino Book Award for its cover illustration inspired by Nylda's original pastel drawing. Orange Blossom Publishing published the second enhanced edition in May of 2023 under the new title, Alborada, a cross-country memoir in poetry. Nylda is the vice president of the Florida Writers Foundation, a literacy-promoting nonprofit organization. She nurtures a community of creatives, reawakening society through her website and newsletter, World Sketches. Her memoir is available at Orange Blossom Book on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. For more information about the Florida Writers Association, Visit us at floridaWriters.org. Until next time.